All right, Miggy, are we ready to get started?
Oh, I'm ready to get started. Are you?
I'm ready. Okay. We are going to pause our music, which paused while we were introducing everyone. But hi, everyone. My name is Sarah Kelly. I'm a product marketer here at Figma. Thank you so much for joining our Grid Office Hours live stream. I'm going to take you through a very brief overview of Grid and then pass it over to our wonderful host, Miggy, who's going to take us through a much more deep dive of Grid. But before we jump in, some quick notes here at the top, some housekeeping. This session will be recorded and sent to your emails if you want to take a look at this after, or if you miss anything, it'll be in your inbox. Make sure to use the Q&A button. We have the team who created Grid here with us live today to answer any questions you might have as Miggy is going through his demo. Make sure to set the chat to everyone to keep the conversation going. And finally, and most importantly, please be kind in the chat. And if you have any other interest in looking at our code of conduct, make sure to visit figma.com/code of conduct. But let's jump in. All right. Grid. Grid is the foundation of web layouts, shaping everything from complex landing pages and dashboards to simple icons. So we are so excited to introduce a brand new option this year at Config Grid. Now you can design and maintain galleries, bento boxes, and more without having to do workarounds, deep nesting, or rigid layout constraints. Unlike regular auto layout, Grid lets you work in two dimensions, both columns and rows. This means you can structure more flexible, responsive designs without having to nest multiple layers. With Span, you can drag content across multiple cells, perfect for, let's say, asymmetrical style layouts, those bento style layouts. So you can expand charts to emphasize key metrics or make call to actions stand out by spanning them across your layout. You can also fine-tune how items sit inside each cell, positioning things to the left, right, or center, giving you even more control. And finally, if you want exact control, you can drag to resize individual tracks to a fixed width or height for your designs. And with that, we have the one and only Miggy to give us a live demo of the layouts you can achieve using Grid.
Awesome. Thank you, Sarah, so much. Thanks for that overview. And thank you all for joining us today. My name is Miggy. I'm a designer advocate here at Figma. And today we're going to get into the nitty gritty. All right. We're going to begin by just everyone to know that Grid is currently in beta. Those of you that have been using Grid have been giving a lot of feedback. So we just want to address that certain features like hug, like min and max values and variables are on the way. It's just the nature of beta. You know, we working on these things. We want to get them just right. So please hold on tight, but we're going to cover all of the amazing things that you can do currently in Grid. I'm going to begin by talking about the very first thing that you're going to do when you're using Grid. For those of you that haven't yet used it, Grid is a new auto layout option in Figma. It's something that you can add to a frame. You'll notice that when I select this frame here, I come over to the layout panel. Auto layout's a little bit different. We have freeform objects. That's just when you have things inside of a frame. We have vertical auto layout stacks, horizontal auto layout stacks. The wrap auto layout stack will show up as an option when you enable that. We also have the new grid. When I select that, you'll notice that this frame now has a number of different grids. It's by default a 2x2 grid. Now, when I drag objects into that grid, we're going to see how they get placed in, and you can then rearrange them as necessary. So one quick thing is that Grid also works with Shift A. So there's a lot of you auto layout aficionados out there. If you have a structure that is, you know, already looking like it appears to be in a grid, when I press Shift A, you see that it's going to pick the best auto layout option available for that. So when I press Shift A, we see that those squares are now in a gridded position. So let's get a little bit deeper. Grid is two-dimensional. We're going to work with columns, rows, padding, and gap. Now, if you are also coming from, let's say, a print background, gap is going to be your gutters, and your padding is going to be like your margins when you're working with Grid. So when I select this here. I'm going to come over. You'll see that grid is already enabled. When I click on this, I can actually change the amount of rows and columns available within this layout. So let's extend that out by a value of 4 and 4. Now, over here, I have a shape. This shape has a stroke enabled on it. When I add this, you can see it's going to hover over that. I'm going to paste that in there. So if you want to visualize how grid is working, I can select that object, press Command D, 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 D. I'm duplicating this object inside of that grid. When you no longer have available area and I press D, it will attempt to create another row to begin to compensate for that. So let's take a look at that same concept again. Now thinking about the padding and the gaps associated with it. This is just like an auto layout wherein you have padding on the outside and a gap on the inside. Here, when I click on the canvas, you'll see I can actually adjust the padding manually. Those values, when you select that frame, you come over here on the right, you can see how they show up. So you have the gap value. I can change that value here by typing 32, press tab 32, and you'll see that it changes there. The gap value doesn't get edited on the canvas. There's UX kind of reasons for this, but the padding will be able to be adjusted here. So I can manually adjust that padding, or pro tip, if you want to adjust all of your padding at the same time, if I command click on the padding field here on the right, I can type in any value that I want and it will edit all 4 sides just like that. So if I were to take a look at this frame, you can see I have a number of objects already within it. When I adjust this gap value, you see the gap applied there. I adjust that vertical gap, and then I begin to adjust that padding. You can see that the objects that are occupying the cells inside of that grid frame, right, they're currently set to fill in both directions. So the resizing of those objects is currently set to fill and fill as they're placed inside of those cells. So when I adjust the row gap or the vertical gap or the padding, they're then going to be more inset. That allows me to then edit those values. So you can see here, I'm adjusting those values. I can move that left and right. And we're going to move on to actually building a little bit more of a design example. So here, I'm going to build out a little layout of animal facts. Who doesn't love animal facts? I'm going to click on this grid. You can see that I currently have a 6x4 grid. So we have 6 columns across, 4 rows down, and I have some images. I'm going to take this text field first. I'm going to drop it. I'm going to drop it right into that first field there. And I can actually span this all the way across. So the cells across that top row are spanned all the way across. Now I can actually select and drag all 3 of these images in there. You'll see that as I drag them in, they kind of get highlighted and now they're placed inside. So it's going to take the available space that I need for those. Now, if I want to make any adjustments, I can kind of move that. I could snap it right? I can snap it left. But for our animal facts, we are then going to add in some additional text. So I dragged in this text field here. I'm going to select these 2, and you're going to see that it's going to look for the available space, and it's going to snap them in. If you are concerned at all, or you just want to see how is it filling up that space, just look down here. When I select that text field, I can see 2 columns by 1 row, and I can see that they're currently set to fill. That fill resizing means that they are going to be responsive to that container. This text field that I have right here, it's currently aligned to the bottom. If I wish, I can align it to the top. I can make those adjustments. Now, if I want to adjust the track sizing, this is going to be something we're going to talk a little bit about. Right now, each one of these rows have an even value. They're all set to auto. But let's say for this title, I want to change that value. When I come over here and I hover over, you're going to see these dots show up. When I select over this dot, it's going to say auto. When I click into it, I can then type in a manual value. So I can say 200. Or what I can do, you'll see this bar that kind of highlights, that's going to allow me to adjust that track. So this is track resizing. So I'm applying a fixed value size to that entire row. And you can see that the content in the remaining rows, they're going to be set to auto. Fun fact, when you're working with the track sizing, you can press the tab key and see all of the values as they're set. So let's say for some reason, I want to adjust any one of these values, I can just press enter and then type in the value that I want there. So once again, that's going to be our animal facts. All right. So now that we've got a sense of how we can use grid, we're placing objects inside of the grid, we're working with our rows and our columns, we're applying, our what is this? The track sizing. We're also spanning across multiple frames. So the cells, right? The cells that we have, I could span across, I could span across. That's fantastic. It's giving me that flexibility that I want from grid. Now let's start to talk about cell alignment, overlapping, and arranging, or otherwise known as z-index. I'm going to add here, right? So you can see I already have a grid on the stage. I have a 6x8. We have these 2 rows of content, and I have these logos over here. Grid is great for creating easy logo walls. I'm going to select all of these logos that I have here on the right. I'm going to drag them over into this area. Notice that it's highlighting the available cells that it's going to place them into, and voila, it's placed them in. Now, let's say I want to scale these down relative to one another. I'm going to press Command. I'm going to press K, not Command, just K. That's going to bring up the scale tool. So right now, each one of those objects is filling the width of the available cell. When I press the scale tool, I can press 0.75x. We're going to make them a little bit smaller. Now that they're smaller, they're no longer filling the available space, and we can begin to align them within their respective cells. So I'm going to click here. I'm going to select them all, and we're going to use the alignment tools under the position panel. So here, when I hit sensor and sensor, you will see that all of those logos are now currently censored within that space. If we use any of the other alignment tools, we can align it to the right. We can align it to the top. We can align it to those sensors. Let's say we want to stagger how these logos are placed. I can easily move them down. This is going to be one of the advantages of grid, is this free form expression. I know a lot of you are thinking grid is going to just constrain your work. You have to now work within these cells, but you would be surprised at the amount of freedom that you can have as you begin working with grid here. So let's say too, if I wanted to scale this, I could press the K key. I could scale this up. And if I want to adjust its placement within the cell, I can even just kind of break outside of that little area. So elements in grid can overlap cells. You'll see right now that I have this text field in here. It's currently aligned to the left and the bottom. If I choose the censor, you see that it's censoring across those 2 cells. If I want, I can also align it there to the top. And when I resize this, you see the act of resizing changes the fill. It's no longer filling that. It's now kind of independent. So I can begin to arrange and move this and align it as I see fit. I can even move it across, and you'll see that it's currently occupying those 6 cells. But if I wish, I can align it over there to the right, and watch this. I can then drag from the left and then realign that text there. So you can have a lot of fun as you begin to arrange those objects. So we made a logo wall. We've adjusted our text. Now let's start talking about changing that alignment as well as layering. So these are just squares. These are shapes that I have here in this space. When you see these little blocks around this shape, those indicators are letting you know in which direction you can begin to resize that. I'm going to drag this to the right. I'm going to drag this up and top. And you're going to see that based off of its current alignment, that's kind of inferring how it's going to scale up and down. If I change its alignment to the left and to the bottom, you can see that there. I can continue to extend this over one of the other cells. And you might be asking yourself, but Miggy, I want that other one. I want the Cheyenne color to sit above everything else. That is where the arrangement of layers comes in. So unlike other auto layout options, when you rearrange the layers, it doesn't break the layout. It doesn't put one object above the other or move its position in the stack. It just changes its layering. So I'm able to have more control in how I layer this. Now, you'll notice that because this is aligned to the bottom, it's occupying that cell. I'm not getting the resizing option down here. I can only scale this up and over. Now, if I change that alignment, I can then readjust how this goes. And let's say I want to break out of the grid on the left. Let's turn off clip content and look at that. I can even overlap in other areas. So once again, what I'm trying to impart here is you have a lot of freedom and flexibility as you're beginning to work within grid in how you're expressing the work that you're doing. You can start to create some really interesting layouts with those overlaps. I have here all of the wonderful people that are on this live stream and just going to add in some of these elements. These objects here are currently set with aspect ratio lock. And what that means is as I scale it, you're going to see that it's going to be adjusting both the the height and the width at the same time. So I can start to, make a fun social graphic that's going to, showcase all of the wonderful faces that are on this live stream today. So I got Sarah over here as well. Let's make Sarah a little bit bigger. And even this grid text, I can begin to position it in a way. I kind of pushed Ida over there. I didn't mean to do that, but I can bring Ida back and voila, there we go. So thinking about alignment, just select the object, use those alignment tools. I just really want to impart that you can have a lot of flexibility when you're working with this. You're going to use those position tools as you are working on them, and it allows you to position the objects that live inside of those cells. Now we're going to move on to intermediate grid options. One thing I like that is really interesting about grid is you can nest grid inside of grid. So here I have a 6x3 grid. Yes, gridception, Leanne, absolutely. So this concept is also known as like compound grids. So if you have, let's say, a 6x3 grid, but you want to evenly place 4 objects across, you can have them inside of a grid and then nest and span that within that grid there. So within a span of, let's say, 6x2, I can then bring this in. I have a 3x1 grid. I can drag that into that row and snap that all the way across. So you can have a lot more control. I can even begin to encroach on my other grid there, right? That those options that I was bringing up. So you can have a lot more flexibility. And you'll notice too, when you resize how objects are going to behave based on whether or not you snap them across those rows with that fill option. So let's say here I made a little calendar grid. You can see when I resize my calendar, it just has a bunch of numbers inside their aligned sensor. I could take this calendar, drop it over here. Let's say I don't want it to occupy that full space of the calendar. I can drag it just to the right and snap it right there. If I wanted to add additional elements, maybe some more photos of pugs into my calendar as well. So nesting grids inside of grids is going to be really helpful as you're working. Now, as we start to get into more advanced gridding, you're going to want to start to use other frames as well as component instances. I have a deeper example that we're going to get into, but I'm going to impart on you to really begin to think about how your components resize, as well as the constraints of the objects within the components. So you see here, I have a bunch of instances. These are actual icons created by Tim Van Dam that currently exist in the Figma editor. These are for adjusting the bordering of objects. If I was to select all of these, here, I just need to reset my example here. I realized I didn't reset it. So if I select all of these icons and I want to, like, let's say, display them as a sticker sheet in my design system, when I drag them in there, look what happened. That's not what I wanted to happen. Let's hit undo. So I'll show you what's happening, right? These icons all have constraints inside of their instances that are telling them to scale. So when I drag them in, they're scaling to those edges, and that's not actually what I want. That's not the behavior that I want. That's not the resizing behavior that I want. Instead, I'm gonna select all of these, right? And look down here, I got my little shortcuts here. We're gonna select the children. We're gonna press enter. That's actually gonna select the objects that are inside of those instances. And we're gonna take a look at the constraints. So the constraints tell objects inside of a frame how to resize, how to behave when that object resizes. So the current constraints on these icons are set to scale. We don't want them set to scale. We want them to center. So I'm going to come over here. Let's center that and center that. And because we selected them all, we pressed enter, we selected those children, and now we've reset those constraints. When we drag them in, they're going to be nice and lovely. They're not going to scale to fit those spaces, right? The instance itself is just kind of expanding. So I'm just using this as an example to show you how objects are going to relate when they're dropped into those frames. So let me hit undo. Over here, I have a couple of frames. What I would recommend is, as you're getting used to grid, begin to build your own examples. Wireframe. So these right here are frames. Each of the objects inside the frames have various constraints. So this top left arrow is set to top left. This top right arrow is set to top right. This object in the center, this little cross that we have here, that's set to center center. This box is set to left and right constraints. That means it's going to follow the left and the right and kind of move itself out, as well as the top and bottom. This is different than scale because it's not going to make it bigger. It's just going to have that rectangle follow those constraints. And so when I was first learning grid, I made these examples to teach myself, oh, okay, this is how I might use an example, right? So even if I want to like overlap onto that space, if I want to, extend this out a little bit, let's say I drop in another object. So I would encourage you all to create little examples for yourself that help you begin to wireframe out how your content might behave as it's resizing. So for now, the grids themselves are essentially kind of determining the grid, the padding, the gap, then kind of determine those cell sizes unless you're using track sizing. So make little examples for yourself, so then that way you're able to get the most out of grid. So here too, I have a number of different components. So I'm testing out the components, I'm resizing them, and the objects inside of the components have different constraints set on them. So when I'm beginning to move these about, I can overlap them, and making different examples of components that give me a sense of how they're going to work with the existing components that I may be working with, right? So create little examples, play around with those constraints, and get a sense of how frames and component instances are going to work. Now, this example that I have here, this is going to be the last screen that you see on your iPhone when you swipe all the way over, when you see the application library. Here, I actually have a grid inside of a grid inside of a grid, but I'm using this example to show you how absolute positioning works with grid. So it's also known as ignore auto layout. I'm going to select this instance. I'm going to hold down the control key. If you're on Windows, it's the S key. I'm going to drag this inside of this component, and you can see it populating over here. So we know that it's inside. Now I'm going to move it to the top right. I'm also going to set its constraint to the right because I want the numbers, if I were to update it, to move from the right to the left. So I've added this in. You can see it's populating here. And essentially what I want to do is if I want to change any of these values, let's do like, 1001. There we go. So I have in here, these objects, and the way that they're able to behave like this is because this is absolutely positioned. If I didn't absolutely position it, it would just try to occupy a grid cell, right? It would do the thing that I don't want it to do. But with ignore auto layout, when I select this, you'll see this little icon highlight up here as well. In the layers panel, you'll see little brackets on it that lets it know to ignore the auto layout, but when resized, it will still follow the top right because the constraint that I set on that object tells it how to behave when it is resized. So let's just give this a quick look and see what it looks like as a prototype. There we go. I'm also using a progressive blur on the top. So I have a progressive blur layer. That's one of those new Figma draw features that I absolutely love. And you can see here a nice example where we have a grid within yet again another grid. So find those examples. Also, let us know what's an example that you found a great opportunity for grid. So we are now going to go to our last example that's going to cover so many of the concepts that we've already talked about today. A lot of you want to build tables with grid. And while grid, not yet perfect, right? We're still missing min and max. We're still missing hug contents. All of this stuff is currently in development. There is still so much that can be done to make a tabular layout. And I'm going to show you some of the tricks that I've done. So this is a table that I've already made. This is like a transaction history. When I select this table, I can resize it. And you'll notice that certain columns are currently set with the track sizing, so they're fixed, right? Certain columns are like left aligned, they're right aligned, right? And we have here the ability to, let's say I want to rearrange these. I'm going to select these two rows and I'm going to drag them up to the top. There's a little blue indicator that's telling me where I'm going to place this. And when I place it there, it's then going to readjust all of those elements there. Now, what I would recommend that you don't move downwards because it's then going to push everything down. Consider the way that items are stacked from the top down, left to right. So if I was to select these two rows, I can then kind of move them up. So I'm working kind of with the constraints that I've been given here. So once again, let's start to talk about how this is built. The way that I'm building this is I'm actually constructing individual cells in Figma using frame cells and all of my either components or text. So this frame cell, when I add it in, it has a bottom border and it has it's basically just a frame that's kind of filling that cell. So the bottom border is being applied on a per cell basis. It's just kind of like Excel in the same way. What I'm also doing here is I'm actually using a variable to control the weight of it as well as the bottom border. So if I was to bring this in here, I duplicate this cell all the way across. We can see that line. Hopefully it shows up on Zoom. But if it doesn't show up on Zoom, I can go to my variables and I can make that table cell like a little bit thicker. So you can see how that's actually working. So let's undo. And let's talk about the making of one of these cells. So here, this frame cell, I'm going to take one of these objects, I'm going to place it inside. Oh, I could see this one already has auto layout on. Let's turn auto layout off. So it's just a regular cell. I'm going to drag in an instance. Now I can censor it within the cell. And because of that constraint resizing, it's telling that object how to behave. So if I was to drop this in, right, and I was to change the track sizing, that's going to work as behave as I wish it to. Let's take another cell here. Hold on, I want to reuse this cell. So let's duplicate that. Let's say I'm going to add in the Shopify bit. I'm going to drop this text in here. This can also be an instance. I'm just showing how the text is going to work. So when I center this, I can left align it. And here I'm going to select this frame cell. I'm going to press Shift A. So it's going to be auto layout. I'm going to make this left aligned. And for the padding on the left, I'm going to set table cell inset padding. So I'm just using a variable here to save me some time. Now I could drop it in and I can span it. So each of these cells, once they're duplicated across, right, that's how they're going to behave. So what we have here is this construct of this table. So you can see here, I have a 7x4 table. So yes, I will show you the orange. I'm sorry, I just saw a question and I wanted to make sure that I answered it. The orange things are the measurements. So down here is the measurement tool. I'm going to explain how I use the measurement tool. This is only available in Pro Plus plans or EDU plans. And what it is it allows you to set measurements on cells, and it gives me a little bit more insight as to how the objects are behaving. So here, I'm going to exit that mode. Here I have this container. So I have this object, it's to the right, this object's to the left, and I'm going to drag it in my header and then have that span. This pagination footer, I actually already have a grid set up with numbers. I have some icons and they're already within a grid. I'm going to cut that and I'm going to paste that in here and align it sensor to sensor. So when I scale this up and down, you can see how it behaves. I'm going to drag that pagination footer in here, and you can see that it acknowledges that I want to fill that space. Now let's work with our data row. This data row is just as I mentioned before, where I have an object, it's sensor aligned, that's going to apply its sensor constraints so you can see how that moves. So I'm going to drop that frame cell in. Oh, wait, you know what? I forgot something. I forgot my labels. Let's add in my labels. I'm going to just drag in all my labels at the same time. You know what? To save time. So here I have, let's say, transactions, amount, date, category, and account. I'm going to move these over. I'm going to take account. I'm going to have that span the last two, and I'm going to have transactions span the first two. So you can see here, once again, if I want to adjust that bottom border, I can go to my variables panel and I can increase that table cell size. If I want to, I could change the color. I could make it red, right? I could make it gray. I'm going to keep it gray for now. And so there we go. So we have that set up. Now we have all of these other cells. I'm going to drag those right in and they're going to snap all the way across. Now, I'm going to bring this back down to 1. There we go. Feels a little bit better. Now, I'm going to use track resizing. So I'm going to select this and I'm going to set this as a fixed value because it doesn't need that much space. I could type in a manual value. I could say 84. I could press tab and I could put in another manual value. Let's say 200. Or let's make it a little bit more. Let's say 240. There we go. So now, even as I'm working, I can see how this is responding. Okay, that's cool. All right. And like, let's say this edit one, it doesn't need to be that big. I'm going to resize that down. And once again, because this is spanning all the way across, it's kind of ignoring those additional sizing. This is spanning all the way across. And you're probably going to be like, but Miggy, I need to have more rows in here. We can't just do with one. I'm going to select this whole row and then just press Command D, Control D if you're on Windows, and we're just going to make more rows. How cool is that? And even here, when I have all of these rows, I'll show you that one more time. I think some of y'all missed this. Wait, let's hit undo, right? So what I did was I selected all of those objects. We have them all here. Command D, 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 right? And so now it's growing to fill that space. And if I want to rename this with a bunch of fake names, I can come over here and choose replace content. So Command K will bring up the quick actions menu. I could type in replace content and I could say, give me a bunch of fake company names and replace content. And now I have a whole bunch of names like Cortex Innovations, Fusion Sphere, Pixel Pioneers. Let's give it a few categories too. So let's see, Command K, replace content, give me fake categories and replace that content. And voila. And let's say I want to change Visa to MasterCard, and let's do that one too. And you can see we can make those adjustments. Now, if I want to highlight this whole row, I can select that background fill. I can like darken that background. And if I want to move that up, I drag it and I move it up. And once again, I can select this table and I can resize it down. And you'll notice that the columns that have track sizing aren't resizing. The ones that are currently set to auto are. I can also make some additional adjustments here. I'm going to set this value to 112, right? Press tab. I'm going to press enter. Let's set that as 84. Let's come down here and let's set this as 84. And you might be thinking, like, how do I manage, my cell heights, right, for my rows? So these are all currently track sized to be a specific value, but these are all auto. I like to use the measurement annotation tool. I click on that. I can see any given cell height and I can select my table. And when I select the table, I can increase that height until I get the value that I want for my cell. So there it is, my cell of 80. Or if I go up a little bit further and pressing the up key, I can make it 88. So currently, the sizing of those auto cells is determined by the width, the height, as well as the padding and the gap. Down the road, we're going to have more options, but this is how I have been building out my content thus far. Oh, yeah. And if you want to like move objects from one table to another, I could select a bunch of rows and I could just easily move them over. And there they are in another table. So you can easily move the objects that you have in one grid onto another grid, given the available states. All right. And once again, we're working to make this a little bit better. There's still some behaviors that a lot of people are going to want for tables, but this has been my approach and my methodology, and it's actually been working out pretty well, giving me a lot of flexibility in terms of how I'm able to work on some of these things. So, with that, Grid is still in beta. Make sure you submit feedback as you're working on it. Would love to see more of what your requests are, as well as the fun things that you may be doing with Grid, or even the very practical things. You could download the Grid Playground file on Community. When you go to the Grid Playground file, this is what it looks like. You can have a much more in-depth understanding of a lot of the Grid basics. Um, Also, big shout out to the team, everybody that worked on it here. So I know that we have Ida, Kelly, we have Katie on the live stream as well. So they've worked, really diligent on this and continue to work on these features. And I'd just like to share with you. So if some of you seen the Grid config talk, you've probably seen this already. You can prototype with Grid. So right here, I have these interactive components that I made where I'm adjusting the gap sizing to make a fun thank you card. And when I play this, it says thank you. And with that, I'm going to hand it back to Sarah.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Miggy. All right, we have a Q&A right now. Let me go ahead and share my screen here. If y'all are able to see that. Before we jump into our Q&A, which we have some great questions to answer live, chat was going absolutely crazy for your demo, Miggy. And as Kathy put it, which is one of my favorite comments, gridiciously amazing. I am going to be using that definitely as one of my puns for grid going forward. But let's jump into our Q&A. We have, just like Miggy said, some of the folks behind grid, including the incredible Ida, Kelly, and Katie, to answer some of the questions that were pouring in during the demo. So starting off with the first one. What's a good rule of thumb on when to use grid versus standard auto layout?
Cool. I can take this one. Yeah, thanks everyone for joining. This is really awesome to see all the energy. But yeah, this is an awesome question. I feel like we get asked this a lot ever since we launched Grid within Auto Layout. And I actually like to think about how both of these tools can work together. And I actually find it a little bit limiting if you try to define strict rules about when to choose Grid versus Auto Layout and like defining that in your workflows. And so I'd actually encourage thinking about how both of them can couple with each other. And we actually designed Grid to grant you more flexibility so that you can, use your typical familiar auto layout stacks, vertical and horizontal, alongside Grid and nest them within each other. But I think to answer the question, a helpful way to think about it is that Grid can help you to build a predetermined structure that you can see and interact with, whereas auto layout can help you organize content more granularly and if you need more specific edits. And so if you find yourself craving like more of an explicit structure that you can actually see and define upfront, so like, you need 4 rows and 4 columns, that's a great place to use and start using Grid. So, like building the main layout of a page or building a dashboard where you might want to like explicitly see a cell that you can add items within, or building a grid of cards or a gallery of sorts. Those are places where you might think like I want explicitly this amount of items spanning across and this amount of items spanning directly below. And so I think grid can be a great use case to just tangibly see a structure of that sort. Whereas with auto layout, that can be a little bit tricky because you can't actually see cells in auto layout and your objects are actually controlling the structure instead. And so with auto layout, it can be a lot easier to, manage this with stacking in one direction and building things like cards where you don't necessarily need to have like your 2 by 2 structure defined upfront. So yeah, I think grid can definitely help define a bigger picture, whereas auto layout can help you fine tune how things are arranged within each a smaller section. So you can definitely have auto layout cards within a grid, and also even nest grids within grids too. So yeah, hopefully this like gives you a better picture of how they can be building blocks to combine on what you're making.
Absolutely. Super helpful. Thanks, Kelly. Moving on to our next question. When is this new feature expected to be out of beta? Are fundamental changes on the way or final feature will be similar to this? And I'll pass this to Ida.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ida. I'm a product manager at Figma. Yeah, this is a great question, and I think there are a few other questions in the chat and in the Q&A that kind of feed into this perfectly. So obviously we are in beta. There are certain features I think Miggy mentioned. We have Hug, the ability to actually set Hug coming. We're working on it very actively. The reason we're in beta still is because we know that there are some fundamental things that we think are more or less table stakes features for this to be kind of in, out of beta that are just not quite there yet. And so part of getting to a point where we're out of beta is just making sure that we are responding to some of those really urgent things like the ability to hug, the ability to set columns and rows to fractional values, things like that. So that's like top of mind and we are on it. My hope is that we will be out of beta within the next few months. So keep an eye out. Unfortunately, I can't give you an exact timeline. I mean, you all know that when you're building products, you never know what's going to happen, next precisely. So we're doing our best. Just know we're working as fast as we can. And then on a kind of separate note, because we're in beta, part of the reason that we wanted to do this live stream, and part of the reason you'll see us kind of asking a lot of questions in general moving forward, is because we want to know where we didn't get things quite right. So for example, I saw a couple of questions in the Q&A about how grid plays with instances and components. Right now, you can't change the amount of columns or rows in an instance of grid. But if that's something that we hear is like a really big miss on our end, that's something we'll talk about changing. Like everything, almost everything is up for discussion. We really want your feedback. So if you feel really strongly, just let us know, and let us know what your use cases are so that we actually make sure that we address it. Yeah, so please keep giving us feedback. Let us know what you think. We are very, very actively marching towards a kind of like true GA announcement for this feature, and everyone's input here is incredibly useful and really genuinely contributes to the end product. So we really appreciate it.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Ida. And like Ida said, keep the feedback coming. Let's move on to our next question. How will this relate to dev and show up for them in dev mode to code correctly? And I will pass this to Katie.
Hi, everyone. I'm Katie. I'm one of the engineers that worked on Grid these past couple of months. So how this relates to dev is our grids show up in dev mode. So when you switch from design to dev mode, you'll see in the panel for the CSS that we take your grid properties and we translate them to the proper grid like values in CSS. So we use grid template rows and grid template columns and display grid on the grids itself. And you can see that here. And then for children nested in the grid, we give them their proper spans and their alignments. And in terms of overlap, if you have a grid child, you can give it an explicit size, and that will also show up in the CSS. And so that's how we handle that. But yeah, that is the short answer. Is we are translating everything into dev mode pretty similarly to how we do it for other auto layouts.
Incredible. Thanks so much, Katie. And thank you so much for all of you that have attended this Grid office hours. Thank you so much. Please keep leaving us your feedback. We see you on socials and in the chat. And with that, that is the end of our webinar. Thank you so much, everyone. Oh, amazing.
Thank you all for joining.